Okay class, today we will start the discussion on the bulk properties of the sediment, and the first property which we will discuss, that is the particle size distribution. So it is important to consider the particle size distribution for the bulk because when we are dealing with the single sediment particles, it is quite easy to understand the properties for that one particle. But when they are in bulk, different particles can have different sizes, they can have different shapes, and respectively all other parameters can also vary. So to deal with the sediment in bulk, we can take different samples from the whole mass, and we can find out different statistical parameters from that sample, and for that we can find out the mean, distributed, and standard deviations. Two methods which are commonly used for the particle size distribution understanding are size frequency distribution curve and the percentage finer than curve. For the size frequency distribution curve, we will divide the whole mass into a number of classes, and each class is referring to one size range. We will find out the percentage of the whole mass which is lying in that particular class size, and we can plot a histogram, and that is the size frequency distribution curve. And if we simply plot the cumulative of those percentages in different classes, then we will have the percentage finer than curve. So in this slide you can see the typical shapes for the size frequency distribution curve and the percentage finer curve. Now next property is the specific weight. The specific weight of the deposited sediment depends upon the extent of the consolidation of the sediment. It will increase with the time after the initial deposition, because with the passage of the time the consolidation will take place and the voids will reduce, so the weight will increase for the given mass. It also depends upon the composition of the sediment mixture. Next property is the porosity. It is important in the determination of the volume of the sediment deposition, because if you know the total volume of the sediment bulk, if you know the porosity, then you can find out what is the volume of the solid sediment in the total mass. It is also important in the conversion from the sediment volume to the sediment weight and vice versa. You can use a specific equation for the computation of the sediment discharge by the volume, including that due to the voids, once the porosity and the sediment discharge are known to you by weight. Now next discussion is on the incipient motion. It is a very important factor when you are studying the sediment transport, channel degradation, and the stable channel design. When you are defining the incipient motion, you can find different terms in the literature given by different researchers. Some of them are giving the term initial motion, stable grain movement, weak movement, and the critical movement. So in spite of these differences in the definitions, significant progress has been made on the study of the incipient motion, both theoretically and experimentally. Now we will see the general consideration on the simple spherical particle which is present at the bottom of the open channel. The forces which are acting on this channel are the drag force, lift force, submerged waste Ws, and the resistive force Fr. This is the channel bed, and this is our water level, and this is the typical velocity profile. Now a sediment particle is in the state of the incipient motion when one of the following conditions is satisfied. Your lift force is equal to the weight of the sphere, drag force is equal to the resistive force, and the overturning moment is equal to the resistive moment. So overturning moment is due to the drag force and Fr, and resistive moment is due to the Fl and Ws. If any of these conditions is satisfied, in that case the incipient motion will take place. Now we will discuss some incipient motion criteria. So mostly used criteria are the shear stress approach and the velocity approach, but because of the stochastic nature of the bed load movement, you can also have the probabilistic approach, and you also have some other criteria. So we will discuss these one by one. So starting with the shear stress approach, the first formula is the formula given by the White's analysis. So White has assumed that the slope and the lift force have significant influence on the incipient motion, and hence can be neglected compared to the other factors. According to the White, a particle will start to move when the shear stress is such that the overturning moment is equal to the resistive moment. So this is the equation which is given by the White after the analysis. Tau C is the critical shear stress at the incipient motion, and this is the equation, and in this equation this C5 is constant, gamma S is the specific weight of the sediment, and gamma is the specific weight of the water, and D is the particle size. So through this equation you can see that the critical shear stress is proportional to the sediment diameter. Factor C5 is the function of the density and the shape of the particle, and the fluid properties and the arrangement of the sediment particles on the bed surface. Value of this constant C5 gamma S minus gamma for the sand in the water ranges from 0.013 to 0.04 when the FPS system is used. Next formula in the shear stress approach is the Shields diagram. Shield has applied the dimensional analysis approach to determine the some dimension as parameters and establish his well-known diagram for the incipient motion. The factors that are important in the determination of the incipient motion are the shear stress, difference in the densities between the sediment and the fluid, diameter, kinematic viscosity, and the gravitational acceleration. You can see these parameters in these equations. So these are the equations which are given by the Shields after the dimension analysis. Rho S and rho are the densities of the sediment and the fluid. Gamma is the specific weight of the water. U static is the shear velocity, and tau C is the critical shear stress at the initial motion. So these are the equations. The relation between these two parameters is then determined experimentally. So this is the basic figure which is given by the Shields. Along Y you have the dimension as the shear stress parameter, and along X you have the boundary Reynolds number. So figure shows that the experimental results which are obtained by Shield and other researchers. So you can see different points for different researchers at the incipient motions. At the point above the curve, particles will move, and at the points below the curve, the flow will be unable to move the particles. So this is the limiting value for the shear stress. So all the particles which are having the parameter lying above this line, they will show the movement, and all the points which are lying below this line, they will not show any movement. Further, this diagram has been modified by different researchers based upon their research. So this is a basic diagram which is given by the Shield. Now next is the velocity approach, and in the velocity approach the first study is carried out by the Frontier and Scobie in 1926. He made an extensive field survey of the maximum permissible values of the mean velocities in the canal. The permissible velocities for the canal of different materials are summarized in this table. So you can see you have the table which is given the mean velocities for different cases in which you have different types of the soil and different cases of the water in the channel. So although there is no theoretical study to support or verify the values shown in this table, but the results are based upon the inputs from the experienced irrigation engineers and should be useful for the preliminary designs. Now next discussion in the velocity approach is on the Gillstrom and ASCE studies. Gillstrom in 1935 made a detailed analysis of the data obtained from the movement of the uniform materials. His study was based upon the average flow velocity due to the ease of the measurement instead of the channel bottom velocity. So this figure gives a relation between the sediment size and the average flow velocity for the erosion, transportation and sedimentation. So you can see along X you have the particle size. Particle size is increasing, and you can see also the class names for different sizes, and along Y you have the river velocity. This is the average flow velocity in the river. So if you know the particle size, if you know the velocity, then you can predict that what will be the behavior of that sediment for that particular velocity in the river or in any open channel. So carrying on this Gellstrom and ASE studies, the permissible velocity relationship which is shown in the figure is restricted to the flow depth of at least 3 feet or 1 meter. If the relation is applied to a flow of the different depth, a correction factor should be applied based upon the equal tractive unit force. So this is the equation. Critical shear stress is gamma R1 S1 is equals to gamma R2 S2, where R1 and R2 are the hydraulic radius or hydraulic mean depth. S1 and S2 are the channel slopes. You can assume the Manning's roughness coefficient and channel slopes remain same for the two channels of the different depths. A correction factor can be obtained by the Manning's formula as this. So you can use the standard equation for the velocity given by the Mannings, and by simplifying the equations for channel 1 and channel 2 with the different depths, after rearranging you will get this equation. Next consideration in the incipient motion is the probabilistic consideration. The incipient motion of a single sediment particle along an alluvial bed is probabilistic in nature. It means you cannot predict the actual behavior or trend of the movement of the particles. It depends upon the location of a given particle with respect to the particles of the different sizes. It depends upon the position on a bed form such as ripples and dunes, instantaneous strength of the turbulence, and the orientation of the sediment particles. Gessler measured the probability that the grains of the specific size will stay. It was shown that the probability of a given grain to stay on the bed depends mainly upon the Shields parameter and slightly on the grain's Reynolds number. The ratio between the critical shear stress determined from the Shields diagram and the bottom shear stress is directly related to the probability that a sediment particle will stay. The relation is shown in this figure. So this figure shows the graph between the probability and the ratio of the critical shear stress to the bed stress. And lastly, we have some other incipient motion criteria, and the first one is that the Meyer-Peter and Mueller criteria. From Meyer-Peter and Mueller bed load equation, which will be further discussed in the next slides, the sediment size at the incipient motion can be obtained as by this equation. So over here, this D is the sediment size, S is the slope, K1 is the constant. It is 0.19 when diameter is in feet, and it is 0.058 when the diameter is in meter. N is the channel bottom roughness or Manning's roughness coefficient, and D90 is the particle size for which the 90% of the material is passing. Next is Mavis and Losch's criteria. They developed the following relationship for a sediment particle at its incipient motion condition. So this is the equation. This Vb is the competent bottom velocity, and it is 0.7 times of the mean flow velocity. K2 is a constant. It is 0.51 when the velocity is in feet per second, and it is 0.155 when it is in meter per second. D is the sediment size. And the last one is the US Bureau of Reclamation. So you can see this graph along where you have the tractive force, and along X you have the mean sediment size. So you can find out the tractive force, or if you know the tractive force and the diameter, you can check where your point is lying, and you can predict either the tractive force for that particle which you have that is sufficient to start the incipient motion or not. Now next we will discuss the resistance to the flow and the possible bed forms in the study of the open channel hydraulics with a rigid boundary. where the boundary is not varying with the flow condition, the roughness coefficient can be treated as a constant. After the roughness coefficient has been determined, a roughness formula can be applied directly for the computation of the velocity, slope and depth. But in the fluvial hydraulics, the boundary is not considered to be rigid, it is a movable boundary, and the resistance to the flow or the roughness coefficient is variable. And resistance formula cannot be applied directly without the knowledge of how the resistance coefficient will change under the different flow and sediment conditions. Extensive studies have been made by different investigators for the determination of the roughness coefficient of the alluvial beds. The results investigators often differ from each other, leaving uncertainties regarding the applicability and accuracy of the results. The lack of the reliable and consistent method for the prediction of the variation of the roughness coefficient makes the study of the fluvial hydraulics a difficult and challenging task. Now we will discuss the resistance to the flow if you have the rigid boundary, and in this we will first discuss the velocity distribution approach. So you are having this equation for u. This u is the velocity at a distance y above the bed. U steric is the shear velocity, and it is calculated by this formula, square root of GdS. S is the slope, nu is the kinematic viscosity, and K S is the equivalent roughness. The above equation can be integrated to obtain the relationship between mean flow velocity Vs and the shear velocity U steric or roughness coefficient Ks. Next is Darcy's formula. The Darcy's formula is originally developed for the pipe flow, and this is HF is FLV square over 2GT. Over here, HF is the frictional loss, F is the Darcy's coefficient, Darcy's friction factor, L is the pipe length, D is the pipe diameter, V is the average flow velocity, and G is the gravitational acceleration. For the open channel flow, this D will be 4 times of the hydraulic radius, and slope is HF over L. The value of F can be expressed after simplification by this. So further you can simplify this equation in terms of shear velocity U steric. So this will be the equation. Next formula is Chase's formula for the rigid boundary resistance, and this is V is C square root of RS, and also you have the Manning's formula, that is V is 1 over N R raised to power 2 by 3 into S raised to power 1 by 2. Now we will discuss the bed forms. There is a strong interrelation between the resistance to the flow and the bed configuration and the rate of the sediment transport. In order to understand the variation of the resistance to flow under different flow and sediment conditions, it is necessary to know the definitions and conditions under which different bed forms will exist. So we will discuss some basic terminologies. First we will discuss what is a plane bed. This is a plane bed surface without elevation or depression larger than the largest grain of the bed material. So you can have slight undulations, but they are not more than the size of the largest grain of the bed material. Then you can have ripples. These are the small bed forms which with the wavelength less than 30 cm and height less than 5 cm. Ripples profiles are approximately triangular and with the long gentle upstream slopes and short steep downstream slopes. Then you have the bars. So these are the bed forms having the length of the same order as the channel width or greater and height comparable to the mean depth of the generating flow. There are point bars, alternate bars, middle bars and tributary bars as shown in the following figure. You can see these are the middle bars, these are the point bars, tributary bars, alternate bars. Next are the dunes. These are the bed forms smaller than the bars but larger than the ripples. Their profile is out of phase with water surface profile. Then you have the transitions. The transitional bed configuration is generated by the flow conditions intermediate between those producing the dunes and plain bed. In many cases, part of the bed is covered with the dunes while a plain bed covers the remaining. Antidunes, these are also called standing waves. The bed and the water surface profiles are in phase while the flow is moving in the downstream direction. The sand waves and the water surface waves are actually moving in the upstream direction. And then you have the chutes and pools. These occurs at relatively larger slopes with the high velocities and sediment concentrations. This figure shows the basic layouts for different types of the bed forms. So this is plain bed, this is a ripple, this is dune with the ripple superposed, dunes, chutes and pools, anti-dunes. Now we will discuss different flow regimes. The flow in the sand bed channel can be classified as lower and upper flow regimes with the transition in between. The bed forms associated with the flow regimes are as follows. The lower flow regime will have the ripples and dunes. The transition zone will have the bed configuration ranging from the dunes to the plain beds or to anti-dunes. And the upper flow regime will have the plain bed with the sediment movement, anti-dunes, breaking anti-dunes, standing waves, and chutes and pools. The factors which are affecting the bed forms are the depth of the water, slope, density, size of the bed material, gradation of the bed material, fall velocity, channel cross-sectional shape, and the seepage flow. Now further we will discuss the resistance to the flow with the movable boundary. The total roughness of the level channel consists of two parts. Grain roughness or the skin roughness, that is directly related to the grain size, and form roughness, that is due to the existence of the bed forms and that changes with the change of the bed forms. If the Manning's roughness coefficient is used, the total coefficient n can be expressed as summation of n dash plus n double dash, where n dash is Manning's roughness coefficient due to the grain roughness and n double dash is the Manning's roughness coefficient due to the form roughness. The value of the n dash is proportional to the sediment diameter to 6 power, and there is no reliable method for computation of n double dash. Our instability to determine or predict the variation of the form roughness poses a major problem in the study of the alluvial hydraulics. So in this case, first of all we will discuss what is surface drag and form drag. Similar to the roughness, the shear stress or drag force acting along a alluvial bed can be divided into two parts, like this. So shear stress is gamma S R dash plus R double dash. So it is hydraulic radii due to the grain and form roughness, and similarly this tau is the drag force due to the grain and the form roughness. Now we will discuss the bed load transport. So when the flow conditions satisfy or exceed the criteria of the incipient motion, the particles of the sediment along the alluvial bed will start to move. The movement of the particle can either be majorly along the bed surface or it can be in suspension. So if the motion of the sediment is along the bed majorly, and that can be in the form of the rolling, sliding or jumping, then it is called as the bed load transport. Generally, the bed load transport of a river is about 5 to 25% of that in the suspension. However, for the coarser material, higher percentage of the sediment may be transported as the bed load, because in suspension you will have relatively finer particles which are not moving majorly with the bed surface. Now you have different approaches to calculate the bed load transport, the load which is transported moving along the bed. So first of all we will discuss the formulas which you have under the shear stress approach, and first formula in that is Du Bois approach or the Du Bois formula. So he assumed that the sediment particles move in layers along the bed and presented the following relationship for QB. So it is K into tau minus tau C. So K is a constant which is 0.173 over D raised to power 3 by 4, and the relationship between the critical shear stress, this constant K and D, are shown in the following figure. This critical shear stress can be determined from the Shields diagram. Du Bois equation was criticized mainly due to the two reasons: that all the data was obtained from the small laboratory volume with a small range of the particle size, and it is not clear that this equation is applicable to the field condition. Next we have the Shields approach. So in his study of the incipient motion, Shields obtained the semi-empirical equation for the bed load, which is given as this. So over here QB and Q is the bed load and the water discharge per unit width. Tau is the shear stress, that is gamma ds, and d is a particle size. Gamma s and gamma are the specific weight of the sediment and the water. Above equation is dimensionally homogeneous and can be used for any system of the units. The critical shear stress can be estimated from the Shields diagram. Next is Meyer-Peter approach. Meyer-Peter conducted extensive laboratory studies on the sediment transport. His formula for the bed load using the metric system is given over here. So QB is the bed load in kg per second per meter. Q is the water discharge in kg per second per meter. S is the slope and D is the particle size. The constants 17 and 0.4 are valid for the sand with a specific gravity of 2.65. Above formula can be applied only to the coarse material having the diameter of the particle more than 3 mm. For the non-uniform material, you can assume that D is equals to D35. Under the energy slope approach, you have the next formula as Meyer-Peter and Mueller approach. After 14 years of the research and analysis, Meyer-Peter and Mueller transformed the Meyer-Peter formula into Meyer-Peter and Mueller formula, and this is the equation, and these are all the parameters which are mentioned in the formula. It is giving you the bed load rate as metric ton per second per meter. Okay, so all of these are the factors are mentioned over here. The slope in the equation can be find out from the Stricker's formula. So this is the equation to find out the slope, and these are the ways to find out the other coefficients in the formula. Next approach to calculate the bed load transport is under the category of the discharge approach, and in that we have the formula as a Skocklitsch approach. So this is the formula which is given by this approach for QB. Over here QB is a bed load in kg per second per meter, D is a particle size in millimeter, and Q and QC is a water discharge and critical discharge at the incipient motion. This QC formulas are applicable for the sediment with a specific gravity 2.65. Next is the regression approach, and in this we have the formula which is given by the Rotner. So Rotner applied the regression analysis on the laboratory data and developed the dimensionally homogeneous formula which is given below over here. So this equation is for QB, the bed load discharge, and these are all the parameters given for this. Further you have these approaches as well. Now we will discuss a numerical problem in which we will calculate the bed load by different methods, and then we can do a comparison of the results which we are getting by applying different methods. So you are given with the sediment load. The sediment load was measured from a river with the average depth as 1.44 feet and the average width as 71 feet. The bed load is fairly uniform and the medium size D50 is 0.283 millimeter. Average velocity is given to you as 3.20 feet per second. Slope is 0.00144. Water temperature is 5.6 degrees centigrade and measured bed load concentration is 1610 parts per million by weight. Calculate the bed load proposed by Dubois, Shields, Koschlik, Meyer-Peter, and Mueller and Rotner and compare the results with the measurements. So these are all the parameters given to you. You have calculated the discharge. You are given with the cross-sectional dimensions. You know the velocity, you can find out the discharge. You have also calculated the small q, that is the discharge per unit width, and measured bed load is this. It is discharge per unit width, small q, into this concentration. So this is the solution of the bed load by different formulas. So just remember that you have to use the given units for that certain formula. And this is the final comparison of all the bed loads calculated from different formulas, and this is the final value. Also at the end we have calculated the ratio of the calculated bed load and the measured bed load.